So earlier this week, I was listening to the new video from Michael Talks About Stuff. Specifically, he was discussing Dark Sister and potentially which character might end up being the wielder of that sword in Winds of Winter. And I think he largely came to the conclusion that I agree with, that it's going to be Hodor holding the sword with Bran warging into Hodor. I think that's a strong possibility. Uh, But I had an idea that kind of goes into another dimension there, another plot point that might be sandwiched in between, and I'd like to discuss that here. It's going to take a moment for me to get there, so just bear with me for a moment. And actually, this doesn't even start up in the north, up in the Hollow Hill. This starts up or down in King's Landing. In the very last chapter of Dance of Dragons in the epilogue. Basically, the last thing that has happened in our version of the story as we understand it. And it has to do with something that I've never really understood about that chapter, specifically why Varys takes his time explaining his master plan to Kevin Lannister. Uh, it's not impossible to me to think of Varys as wanting to sadistically outline the failure of the Lannister house to Kevin as he's dying. I could see Varys doing that. That's a possibility. But Varys also says that he generally thinks that, Kevin's a good man. No hard feelings. This is just, we have to get Aegon the Sixth on the throne, and you're standing in the way of that. It just seems theatrical. Uh, and certainly Varys is a theatrical character. I guess that's enough reason for it to happen, but it just strikes me as odd. Always has. Uh, so who else could he possibly be talking to if he's not talking to Kevin? In this, Goldfinger style monologue expressing the ultimate ends of his plot. And there's nobody else in the room. Pycelle is dead already. The little birds are there. They're mute, and they're also under his control in some way that we don't quite understand. Uh, so why would he, hide anything from them? Why wouldn't they know, or why would they care? They always seem somewhat zombie-like to me anyway. So it's not them. He's at the very least talking to us as the reader. And this is George talking to us as the reader, just putting the nail on the head definitively that yes, this is part of the grand master plan that we started seeing way back in Game of Thrones with Illyrio and Varys being listened into by Arya down below the Red Keep. Okay, so there's that. But the question becomes, who else could he potentially be talking to, or could potentially be hearing this? And my answer to that question, if you haven't gotten all there already, and I'm sure that somebody has said this in the past, could this be Bloodraven? And the reason why I'm suggesting that it's Bloodraven is the fact that just that evening, as Pycelle was dying, uh, a giant white raven from the Citadel had appeared in the rookery, and it's actually sitting there on its perch when Kevin gets shot with the crossbow. And it's there from the Citadel to announce that that winter has come. The last time that we've seen one of these things, if I remember right, is the one that announced autumn, and that lands on Dragonstone when Stannis is still in Dragonstone in Clash of Kings. So these things are rare, these giant ravens. And they're also albino. They're white. And obviously, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about a white raven is Bloodraven. And of course, he can warg into animals. So can Bran at this point in the novel. And so it seems very possible to me and I could be wrong about this. I don't know exactly how the werewood net works that far south of the neck. It seems like an open question to me. I think there's some degree of radio signal, however you want to call it, trickling out. I don't know if it's through the God's Eye. I don't know if it's through some hidden werewoods that we don't know about. But for some reason, the Raven messaging system works. My guess is that it's powered by the werewood net in some way, and there's enough signal down there in the south for it to work very effectively. I could be totally wrong about this, but that's what I think is happening. And I think it's very possible that, like I said, that Bloodraven and or Bran are seeing and hearing through the eyes of this bird. When Kevin gets shot with the crossbow bolt, the bird definitely alights and flies around in the chamber. It doesn't necessarily say that the text doesn't necessarily say rather that it actually flies out the window. It could still be in there. It could be outside. And so that's kind of where this thing all starts. Because what happens for Bloodraven if he finds out that his oldest enemies, the people that he tried to eliminate for, the best part of a century, the people that he gave up his cushy life at court for and all of his machine machinations for, to go up north. I mean, he killed this last of the Blackfires, or so he thought, and then of course they kept coming and coming for years afterward. What would he do if he found out there was yet another Blackfire on its way? And of course, from what Varys tells Kevin, there's no mention of the Blackfires, of course, but you would think Bloodraven, hearing that there's some secret Targaryen in Essos coming to conquer the kingdom again at the head of the Golden Company. Oh my God! Bloodraven's immediately going to jump to, oh, okay, this is Phaegon. This is not Aegon. And who knows what he might even know about Varys and Illyrio. I mean, he's been up in the north for a long time, but I see it as possible as him having some amount of information about what's been going on in external geopolitics. And at this point, we're kind of given to thinking that Bloodraven has given up the Game of Thrones, so to speak, that his whole life under the tree now is focused on figuring out how to defeat the others, to train maybe to train Bran, maybe to do something more sinister, who's to say. But if he's got this news that the Blackfires are back, it's going to potentially affect his planning and what he's planning on doing if he doesn't know they're coming already. And that's kind of where my idea comes into it, about the killing of Bloodraven, or potentially the killing of Bloodraven. Because this is something that, Bran has traveled all this way. He's lost the use of his legs. He's given his life up to becoming this magical tree wizard, just like Bloodraven. And to suddenly see his mentor turn back toward this, internecine political struggle, it's going to, amongst other things, potentially the murder of Jojen as well, make him realize, oh, this person is not who I thought he was. This is not who he represented himself to be. And you've got to think at that point about who Bran really is. If he starts looking at the situation from the eyes of who he is. I mean, he's technically Ned Stark's most legitimate heir. And we meet Bran Stark on the page the very first time, watching his father decapitate a deserter from the Night's Watch. That's a foundational moment in this boy's life. And even more so, uh, we know that this is also the first thing that George wrote in the whole series, that this was his original idea of this boy going out and watching his father execute a criminal. That was the first chapter, if I'm correct, and it might have been even his first idea that was the seed of the rest of the series. And if you add to that the fact that Bran knows who Bloodraven is, he knows that he is also a deserter of the Night's Watch. I mean, Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, was the Lord Commander. He went a ranging some point deep in the past and never came back. And so technically, I think it's fair to say that Bloodraven is a deserter. And that's a foundational moment in Bran's life, as I think I've said 3 or 4 times at this point. Uh, that that killing a deserter of the Night's Watch is something that, as far as he's concerned, is a completely moral and correct thing to do. Uh, Now, maybe the fact that Bloodraven is Bloodraven is going to force him to think differently about this. Maybe I would think that based on what we know about George, maybe that's the grand moral struggle that Bran's story at least turns around. Is it possible for him to envision a world where uh, executing criminals uh, isn't the right thing to do, and that he can change, that he can, somehow, manage to still love his father, honor his father, but not honor his father's ways necessarily. Uh, that would be huge. That would change Bran forever. Uh, and his story could go on from there in lots of interesting ways. But that's kind of where I'm seeing it go. Is that you might have a moment where Bran wargs into Hodor and effectively levels these charges at Bloodraven, and uh, there is no escaping the guilt. We know that he's guilty of at least the base charge of deserting the Night's Watch. And of course, I'm willing to, listen to a technicality there. He's, perhaps doing an even greater mission and a more important mission uh, that is still in line with the actual goal of the Night's Watch. There's that. And maybe that's a point in his defense. Uh, but either way, I still think it's a strong possibility that we're brought to this moment. Uh, and I guess that's really all there is to it. I think from there, perhaps Bloodraven dies more similarly to the way that he does in the show. I hope not. Maybe he voluntarily sacrifices himself. Maybe there's a million other things that can happen. But I kind of wanted to just get all this out in a completely terrible quality video with no art, no graphics, just my problematically nasal voice recorded poorly. And I suppose I could have put this, posted this on, on one of the various forums, but what the hell? I really enjoyed Michael's recent video, and I mentioned this in the comments, and some people said they were kind of interested in hearing more. So, no doubt this will disappoint them, and if I can just do that, I'll be a happy man. Um, anyway, it's Friday night. I'm going to go do something else. And you guys have a wonderful weekend and the rest of your lives in case I don't ever do this again, because already I am incredibly embarrassed by this. Seriously, though, have a good one. Bye bye.